I think it's Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire, which we are not going back there.
What were they doing in Dublin and keeping?
Oh. The Germans were really good at getting Italians killed historically. Like when we say worst dictator ever, do we mean the most evil dictator ever? Or do we mean the dictator who was just really bad at his job? The War of the Bucket is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody stole somebody's bucket. Except that's not true. One of my friends did a semester abroad in Italy, and I remember texting him early in, and I was like, how's the semester abroad going? And he was like, the only things I've heard about Mussolini here have been vaguely sympathetic. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, specifically gentlemen, train your wives and daughters with a gun.
Just train them to use a gun, don't train them with it.
Oh, yes. The year is 794 AD, or perhaps 796 AD, depending on which calendar you use. And if you're a monk at the monastery of Lindisfarne, you're about to have a very bad time. Stephen, do you know why?
Because someone's about to get violated in more ways than one.
That is not how I thought you were going to answer that question. Anyway, welcome back to Unhinged History. History Unhinged. We just named the show tonight. It's the second episode, but we shot the first one 2 hours ago. With me today, here in the Redacted Media studio, we have Aidan Thornbury. Do you want to say hi, maybe? Like wave at the camera?
The most Viking-esque looking person in here.
I was just waiting for you to stop talking.
I did.
Yeah, that's not possible.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway,
known this by
I'm
now.
the other half of the Lore Lodge,
Yeah.
the one that you don't see, but arguably might want to see more.
All right. Well, I'm gonna let that one simmer. Right here we have Roman Helmet Guy. He doesn't want you to know his real name because it's embarrassing.
It's Guy.
It's Bartholomew. I am Aidan Mattis. I am the host and lead researcher of the Lore Lodge, and that is
Stephen, aka Stucky of the History of Everything podcast. Hello, everyone.
yeah. And one suggestion was that we call this show the History of Everything podcast.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah.
I did see that. There was a lot of different ones in there. Again, we had what? 3 guys, 1 microphone?
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah.
3 guys, 1 microphone.
I'm really interested in the origin of the History of Everything podcast. We should call it the History of Everything podcast.
That's true.
Shit.
I think the most entertaining bit about 3 guys and a microphone is considering that there are 4 guys here.
Yeah, exactly.
So that would imply that
You're
one
the
of us
microphone.
is the microphone. Yeah.
Yes. The one most
right, everybody
shaped
just
like a
talking to
microphone
Aidan's
between
mouth.
all of us.
Just talking to his mouth. Spitting it a little bit too, maybe.
Oh, dear God.
Take this to a
History 2 on that.
Yeah,
thing.
take this to a different.
History 2. Just get some history 2 on that.
Take this to a different platform that's only for our fans. You know, the Spit in Thornbury's Mouth podcast of everything.
The one you arguably want to see more.
So
Spitting straight historical facts on that mic, yo.
we're doing so good. This is starting off so well. This is great. So, you know, in the last episode, I thought I was going to try and keep things a little structured.
No.
Everybody else decided we were going off the rails, and then I lost the vote about whether or not that would be the main format of the show. So we're going to start off today by talking about whether or not Vikings were the original colonizers. But I suspect that the end of the show will be on a completely different topic. So I guess we'll just see how this goes. Anybody want to take your guesses now as to where we end up at the end?
We're going to get something into modern politics, which is then going to go back at some point to the Crusades.
Okay.
Crusades is a good guess. I feel like 50 Shades of Grey, again, would be probably a recurring topic.
All right, that seems fair. Any ideas?
Will the Ojibwe colonize Australia?
You know what? You're actually pretty close to where I figured this is going to end up. I think we're going to end up on Native Americans.
Yep.
Possibly Oak Island, so that we can get Crusades and Native Americans in one go. But I guess we'll see. Yeah, those Oak Island boys, the secret of Oak Island is taking a long time to uncover.
What is Oak Island?
Yeah, I was.
It's this island up on like the U.S.-Canadian border waters where there is a very deep shaft that appears to have some sort of booby traps in it. I don't know. I haven't watched the show because there's like 12 seasons, and they still have somehow managed to not get to the bottom of this hole.
Yeah, they're really milking it.
Oh yeah, it's what?
No, it's just, okay, for anyone who, like, this is a complete sidetrack thing. While we're doing this,
Our girlfriends,
or in
And
this case,
wife.
my wife, are off at a bar right now doing trivia, and it just so happens that for the trivia, it's entirely history themed. and we're here doing this shit.
They probably hate
And
us
now
right
they're
now.
Probably so mad right now.
No, we haven't. The image, so it's named that American war movie. They have accurately guessed that Saving Private Ryan is Saving Private Ryan, so
Okay.
they did get that one. But they then proceeded to switch up and do, I think, God, I can't even make out what that specific one is. They guessed one thing is Band of Brothers, that is clearly not.
see?
It's in the tropical. They were guessing that one of these in here.
That could be the Pacific.
Yeah, I think that's the.
But it said movie, so I doubt it.
Yeah, but then they have Forrest Gump, but that's not the one with Forrest Gump. That is. Shit, hold on. Wasn't that the one that Charlie Sheen was in?
I don't know.
Or
Looks
something?
like
I
it.
can't remember. That's not. They don't know Glory.
That's fair.
They don't have that one, so that sucks.
I assume
they,
Full Metal Jacket's got to be on.
they don't have that. They guessed American Sniper as Black Hawk Down.
Oh, no.
It does have American snipers in it that are played by Ewan
They
McGregor.
They put Fury as Wonder Woman 2
No.
or Wonder Woman World War II.
As a bit of background, all of us have history platforms because our significant others were like, please stop ranting to me.
Their names?
Well, in this case, my significant other was him.
No.
Yeah.
Their-
Yeah, that's right.
Their nickname
Not actually.
in here is We Are Just Girls.
You're
History
never
Girls.
beating the allegation.
I know.
Yeah.
So anyway, just to get back to the actual subject at hand, when we think about colonialism, when we think about colonizers, people are typically going to look at, Europe from the mid-1500s onwards, right?
I thought you were going to say us.
Well,
but-
yeah, in terms of what they would look like, yes, us. In this case, if we're talking about Vikings, particularly you. The Vikings, believe it or not, guys, the Vikings were not a whole bunch of really, specifically manicured with these complicated haircuts and dreadlock. Well, they did have dreadlocks sometimes, but they didn't have cornrows typically. They mostly just had the typical long hair of the time period, and blonde hair, blue eyes were common. You actually would fit right in. You'd be solid. But
I fit in last week or 2 weekends ago.
that's true. Yeah, we took him to a Renaissance fair, and he looked the part.
If I was an Irish monk and I saw you, I'm running.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Towards me, right?
No, very far away. Now, if you're a woman in northern Angloland,
I was literally about to just say that.
you
Just
would
him
be
in
running.
the middle of the forest, just bathing,
Yep.
just surrounded by this pristine light breaking in through the trees, and then just a bunch of middle-aged Anglo-Saxon women just drooling off on the side.
Well, what I was gonna say is
I've
Vikings
decided
were the
I'm not
original
cutting my hair.
colonists, but
Objectifying Aiden.
yeah, we are objectifying Aiden a little bit. But no,
used to
this was a legitimate problem where English women preferred Viking men. Now, Viking as a term, just to get out of the way before people in the history community yell at us. Viking was not an ethnicity, Viking was a job. But when we speak about the Great Northern Empire, the first Great Northern Empire, because obviously the Swedes had theirs too, but we talk about the Nordic Empire, we're going to refer to them as Vikings because it's a lot easier than saying Hiberno-Norse and Hiberno-English, or not Hiberno-English,
Especially since every single
Anglo-Danish.
place that the culture went into, they would end up integrating within it, which
Yeah.
would create a whole different thing. Whether it was the Irish, whether it was going down into England, whether it was going into different parts of Scandinavia, up around the Finnish territory, or whether it was going down into Russia
Yeah.
and Ukraine. There's all different kinds.
I totally got myself off track with what I was going to say. My point was that the real beginning of European colonization, beyond just, the Greeks did a little bit of it, setting up their city-states across the Mediterranean, but those were typically trade outposts. They weren't really expansive. They didn't tend to go and conquer a large swath of territory.
I have objection.
Okay.
Alexander the Great.
I would not call that colonization.
He used boats. First of all,
He used boats.
So are we defining colonization as the use of boats to move people?
colonization is when white people use boats. And Alexander the Great he used boats.
Colonization is when
Motherfucker.
white man in boat.
Motherfucker, he didn't even build a boat for the Siege of Tyre. Yes, he had a fleet. He built a fucking road on the ocean to go defeat that fortress.
Wait.
He
Is
ended up
that
using boats?
not mega colonization?
He colonized the ocean to fight a fortress. Yes, he did.
He did.
That's the Siege of Tyre right there. That's what he did. Because the causeway, so there's a whole reason. It was the island of Tyre because it was an island. It was actually an island, completely isolated and separated on all sides by water.
But it's not now.
No, it's not now, because in his anger, he built an entire causeway to it over the series of months, where he then laid siege to this island fortress from land.
We're actually gonna have an opportunity to talk about a Viking doing some badass shit on an island. Specifically, Harold Hardrada. Do you know what he did in Sicily?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be fun for you guys. But yeah, so what I wanted to say though is, the true like European colonization period begins, in my opinion, with the Vikings, because they're sitting in Norway and Daneland and all of these places, and they're like, you know what, farming's hard. You know what's easy? Killing people. And then so they decided they were going to do this all over Europe. And then when they got bored with Europe, they went, you know what? There's got to be something west of Europe. And there was. And it was called Iceland. And they're like, there's got to be something wester of Europe. And there was. And it was called Greenland. Except it wasn't called that. They called it that, and it was not green. And they were like, well, there must be something wester of west. And there was. And they called it Vinland. And they randomly killed a few Native Americans and then ran away. And I feel like today we should talk about it.
Yeah, pretty much, because that is what they did. Like, in the most simplified explanation you could possibly have, yes, they basically did all of these things. What was the term that they even had for the natives in the first place?
Skraeling.
I thought it was a scree, so the Skraeling.
So, well, scree was a variant of it, yeah.
Okay.
Skraeling, and this was a term that they typically used to refer to native peoples from both Finland and North America.
Basically the same thing. I mean, it was the Finns and the natives.
The way
as
far as they were aware, Inuit and Finn were the same thing. Like, there are, so for example, Selkies, the folklore Selkies, are you guys aware of what these are? You should be.
Yeah, now I do.
So Selkies are from a folklore topic from the Orkneys, where you have this belief in the 1600s through the 1900s, really, about, there are these seal people. They're like mermaids, but seals. And they come up onto land, and they shed their skin, and they become either very beautiful women or very handsome men. And they just lay there in the sun, they bathe nude and all that.
Oh,
and then
I've seen that.
Okay, yeah. And then they go back into the water in their seal skin and all that. But if you take their seal skin, then they are forced to marry you. Because, well, it was the 1600s. But where this most likely started, if you look at the stories and you look at things that were going on in actual historical documentation, they had these sightings of what they referred to as Finns. They said they're Finns, but they were in sealskin canoes up in the North Sea, kind of around the Orkney area. And what later came to be known is that the people of Greenland were actually making it that far east. So the people they were referring to as Finns were both people from actual Finland, actual Sami people, and also Inuits from Greenland. These people looked so similar to the Norse that they thought they were the same.
That you're forgetting the key details of the Selkie story.
Which one?
Specifically, the reality of the marriage bit, and also the likelihood of they
were probably stranded women who were like trying to just do some fishing and then were kidnapped for like 10 years.
Yeah. It was just them kidnapping Inuits.
The consensual relationship of Orkney Island.
To be fair, it's not like they were going to Greenland and raiding it for women and taking them back and being like, no, she just turned up on a beach. She was a seal 1 minute and now she's a woman.
Yeah, they weren't the Saskets.
Yeah, they were washing up. They were washing up on the shore and they were like, I see a sealskin. I see a woman. This woman must actually be a seal.
The greatest ancient philosopher known to men just had arguing over people. This is like the same level of justification.
Yep.
No, it's the same level of justification of what they would use back in the day with the Greeks, where it's like, the birds turned to stones. Mm-hmm. Because they didn't understand in many different cases the thing for migration and what would happen. So there was theories about where did the birds go. And the running theory in ancient Greece for a number of years was they turned to stones or plants or trees, and they slept in that form and then became birds again in spring.
Aristotle was onto a lot of things. He was also really far off on a lot of things. Yeah.
He guessed the number of teeth that women have wrong.
Why do you need to guess?
Wait, no. And this lasted for how long?
Nobody checked it.
Nobody checked for like hundreds of years.
Explain this?
So he said that women have less teeth or fewer teeth than men, and everyone was just like, women have fewer teeth than men because Aristotle said so. And he never bothered to like look into a woman's mouth.
Nobody did.
No, he was
Well,
too
I
busy
mean,
looking into
listen,
his-
in Athens, they weren't doing a lot of looking at women in general.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
They were like, look at this beautiful woman with whom, in order to continue my line, I must procreate. But on the other hand, this 14-year-old boy looks luscious.
You have to educate him.
Yeah. Yeah, I gotta, hang on, let me go educate this
out of pocket
youthful child.
Just a string of things stuck at the very beginning of the episode that is just like out of pocket statements.
Yeah.
And that is the opening. First 3 seconds of the podcast. Right there.
Yeah, you're gonna have fun picking a teaser, teaser for the beginning of
It
each
is
episode.
that, and then it just fades to black and then comes back.
That one may actually get us in trouble, so don't do that one. YouTube might be like, demonetized. No, absolutely not. But I think my favorite thing with the Vikings actually is the fact that you have these dudes who are coming out of one of the least populous regions of Europe, one of the hardest places to live, one of the most violent cultures, and yet, compared to the people of England, they are extremely literate, they're very clean, and they know how to use boats a lot
They
better.
weren't literate, right? They couldn't read.
They had a much higher literacy rate than anyone else in Europe.
With the runic system, they did.
Yeah.
They did.
Can we talk about
Because with a number of things, people specifically were not taught to read for association with knowledge like with the church. It was one of the problems that unless you were educated or noble, there was no reason for you to learn how to read. Whereas other stuff, people on average at least had a more basic understanding of runes and what something would mean. Now, did it mean that they were all like literary geniuses who would be able to read and perform like dissertations? No, God, no.
But they could read basic, like, runic inscriptions. They would be like, this town that way.
Or, my favorite, Halfdan was here.
Yes.
Can we talk about the cleanliness bit, considering every depiction in modern media of Vikings is that they like roll around in mud?
Yeah. I mean, the simple answer is that Hollywood is stupid.
Oh, what? You're telling me those leather-studded spike vests that they were wearing aren't historically accurate?
No, believe it or not. Yeah.
What? The complete lack of helmets or any form of protection when rushing into combat in a wild charge?
Steven, you may not know this, but Ragnar Lothbrok did not live to be 150 years old.
Fuck. Wait, and that one chieftain of an entire tribe wasn't a black woman?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one.
What?
In Vikings Valhalla, it's is it Harold Fairhair? No, it's not Harold Fairhair.
No. I'm trying to remember specifically which one it was, but I remember
It's
when
King
that whole
Horik,
thing
I think.
came here.
I think it's King Horik. They took a Nordic king and turned him into a black woman.
Is it supposed to be historical fantasy?
Well, the Vikings itself tried a little bit.
Yeah.
Everybody, at the very least, they got I wouldn't say most, but they got a good amount of the costuming right. They got a good amount of the weapons used right. They used actual events. They all kind of tied them into this Ragnar Lothbrok character, who may or may not have actually existed. But everybody was at the very least, like, ethnicity-wise, you had English, you had Celtic, you had Nordic. You know, that's what everybody was. Everybody looked like that. They did have parts where they went down to the Middle East, to Sicily at one point.
They raided Morocco many different times.
And you do in the show Vikings have these depictions of, you know, the people the Vikings encountered. So not everybody in the show is white, but when in Northern Europe, everybody's white. You get down to the south, you start to see, you know, Arabs, and you see Moors and people like that. There's here and there in some of the more Mediterranean areas, you see African people. Vikings Valhalla takes a character who is historically a real person who was a male from, I believe, Norway.
Well, it's not just like a real person, it's like someone who may have been real, but then what they did is they combined the traits and descriptions of multiple characters, both male and female, and combined them into one person.
With Horik?
Yes. And then that they did, because what she plays in here is Jarl Hakon.
Oh, so it's Håkon.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, so this is a person who, if I recall correctly, look at this, was someone who may have been real, but also, even from literature, may have been a combination between multiple characters that was turned into one person.
I thought it was Hork.
But they did this, but instead of combining multiple men and doing it, they changed it to be a black woman.
Netflix is not great at historical accuracy.
No, but this is my favorite part in here for justification. As a black Viking ruler, Jarl Hakon instantly created conversation. It says, conversation. Vikings was never 100% historically accurate, but it aimed for authenticity.
The original show kinda did. Valhalla didn't.
All I'm saying is we need a movie about Hardrada.
Oh, I've written it.
Yeah?
I've written the outline for that. I'm not even kidding. Yeah, dude, I would love to talk about Harold Hardrada. Because I knew that we would not remain on the actual subject conversation very long. But this does kind of bring us back to it, because what Hardrada did was very interesting. He was living, so he actually dies in 1066 right before the Battle of Hastings at Stamford Bridge. So arguably, if Harold Hardrada does not invade England in 1066, Harold Godwinson probably does not lose to William the Conqueror.
So real quick, give a little bit more background of who Harold Hardrada is.
That's what I'm about to do.
Okay.
So, but that's his death. And his death is largely amongst medieval historians considered the end of what we call the Viking Age. And the Viking Age basically lasts 800 to 1066. So like the late 790s to 1066. But Harold Hardrada is mostly known for being the guy who died at the Battle of Stamford Bridge and most likely caused the Norman conquest.
Which is bullshit because his early life is badass.
Mm-hmm. So I wrote a paper on this guy in college.
Oh, yeah.
Harold Hardrada, when he was 15, fought in a battle with his brother St. Olaf. St. Olaf died in this battle. Mm-hmm. Harold Hardrada did not. He was wounded, and he was whisked away by his brother's most trusted men.
His brother was trying to get his throne back.
Yeah, he was trying to become
like the brother.
He was trying to solidify his rule of Norway. Yeah. So, because the first king of Norway was Harold Fairhair. I think that was the late 800s. He's the first one to have any claim that he's united Norway. There's, of course, arguments to be made that there were others, but...
It's also from the region, because he didn't control necessarily all the way to the north, but like the southern reaches of what we think of Norway in there, which was the primary place where people lived. He controlled all
what
the way
Norway
up to,
was at the time.
Trondheim.
Yeah, it was. He got up there. So most of Norway is under the rule of Harold Fairhair, and then you have a series of civil wars, a series of conquests. They're always fighting the Danes, and the Swedes not so much, but they're always fighting the Danes. Harold Hardrada is wounded in this battle. At the age of 15, he's whisked away to a farmer's home. He gets better enough that they're willing to let him go. And then they send him to the court of Prince Yaroslav of Kievan Rus. There, he falls in love with Yaroslav's daughter, Elsbeth. Now, Yaroslav goes, you know what, Harold? You have a claim to a throne? That's great. You're broke. You're so broke that you couldn't even afford to get home if you wanted to. Not only that, you're 15. You're not king of anything. You mean nothing. I respect you, but you got a ways to go before you can marry a princess. So what does Harold do? Harold heads south. And Harold joins the Varangian Guard. And it takes him a matter of months, again at the age of like 17 or 18, to become captain of the Varangian Guard, because the guy who's actually in charge, a guy named Georgios, is really bad at his job. He's a bad commander. Harold proceeds to spend the next 20 or so years of his life just being captain of the Varangian Guard, hunting pirates. And then my favorite part is when he goes to Sicily. Because Harold fought the Saracens in the Middle East. He pre-crusaded, you know. He was seeing what was going on before it was cool. And he goes to Sicily. And Harold has a time on the Isle of Sicily. Harold, my favorite part, because he does a few different things, one of which is as he's attempting to sack a city, they all retreat within their walls. And these are old Greco-Roman walls. This is a very sturdy city. He can't get in. And he knows that scaling the walls with ladders is going to get a whole bunch of his men killed. That's a bad idea. He doesn't want to do that, even if he can win. So instead, he starts hosting tournaments outside. Games, melees, some of it's just, like archery, some axe throwing.
Outside for the whole time, like beating huge fucking parties.
And at first, like a couple of the guards up on the walls are like, interesting. That's some stuff that's going on down there. And then more and more guards and civilians and other various groups of people come to watch over months. And of course, all of this comes from medieval sources. It's probably not totally accurate, but the entire city becomes distracted by the games going out outside of their front gate, which gives Harold enough time to send a detachment of men to sneak in and open the gates from the inside. And then the Varangian Guard, who are mostly, for those who don't know, the Varangian Guard was made up primarily of Norsemen, a few Anglo-Saxons, and then some people just from the Middle East. Some Greeks, some Saracens, all of that. They pour into the city, they take it. Another city he can't manage to get inside of, so he fakes being sick. And this actually makes it into the show Vikings, except it's Ragnar and it's Paris.
Yeah, it's the whole thing.
You know what? I respect them for, at least for the most part, keeping the story. Just they changed the setting.
Yeah.
But Harold, he pretends to be sick. He pretends to die. And they put him into a coffin. And his men are like, hey, he wants to be buried within the city at the church. And they say, okay, sure, you can do that. So a few men carry Harold into the city. They have his funeral. And then he leaps out of the box. They've all got their weapons.
Weren't the axes in the casket?
Yeah, the axes were in the casket. So they leap out, they grab their weapons, and they take the city from the inside. And then my favorite one of all of them is that there were a bunch of birds living in one of the cities that was under siege. And because there was no food for the birds in the city, they had to fly out and gather some. So what they did was they would lay seed on the ground for the birds to take. They would then catch the bird. They would tie a bundle of sticks to it, light the bundle of sticks on fire, and release the birds back to the city, where they would nest under the eaves of the buildings and set them on fire.
It's interesting, because then there's that same story or motif shows up in the St. Olga saga.
Yeah, the Olga of Kiev.
But so another story I really like about Hardrada from the sagas is he really hates the commander of the Greek.
Georgios.
Right. Okay. So, you know,
Could not stand Georgios.
yeah. So he's got all the Greek troops, and then Hardrada's leading all of the Varangians. And usually the Greeks show up and get the best camping spots. Right? But this time Hardrada beats them there, takes the best camping spots. They almost get into a huge brawl. They decide from then on they're going to draw lots, right? Or like they're going to draw lots for who gets the best spot from now,
Right.
Whatever it is. So Hardrada goes, okay, fine. So we'll both put our mark into a bowl, and then we'll draw from the bowl, and whoever gets picked is the one who gets to choose the best spots from there. So, you know, Georgios goes, okay, fine, whatever. And so Georgios writes his mark, and then Hardrada goes, let me see what you wrote just to make sure I don't write the same thing. So he looks at what he wrote, puts it into the bowl. Hardrada writes the same exact mark. Okay, and then he puts it into the bowl as well. They have a neutral third-party person pick the mark up. Hardrada immediately snatches it, goes, oh, it's mine. And then he throws it overboard. So they're on a ship. So he throws it overboard. And then, you know, Georgios is like, this is bullshit. Like, obviously, like, you can't, like, how do I know it's yours? He's like, look in the bowl. Your mark's in the bowl. It's so genius. I love it.
It's such incredibly painful.
It's such a travesty that he's like the least known member of the kings involved in 1066.
Oh my god!
Like-
No, because by that time it was the end of the. Theoretically, if he had won, the amount of glory that he would his saga would be. It already is legendary in itself, but he would go down in history as like one of the great kings and conquerors. Well, I mean, I say
He
that
should go down in history as a great king and conqueror either way.
theoretically, it doesn't necessarily mean that his rule afterwards would actually last any long time, or that it would stick around. There is no guarantee that instead of the Normans controlling England, which then turns into England itself, that it does the same thing except the Norse.
Hey man, I mean, if the Normans are controlling England, that's very different than the Northmen controlling England. I mean, it's not like the Normans were named after the Northmen or anything.
Oh yeah. It's definitely not the same here at all.
That's my favorite. That's my other favorite thing about 1066 is like, oh no, the Viking king of England defeated the Viking king of Norway, but then lost to the Viking king of Normandy. Guess the Vikings are in charge again.
It was back and forth.
Everybody involved was a Viking.
Do you got the British Vikings?
Yeah.
Do you got the Danish Vikings?
No.
Or the Norwegian Vikings?
No.
Or do you got the French Vikings? Which one is it?
No, Stephen, you had the boat Vikings, the land Vikings, and the horse Vikings.
That is the most accurate way to describe that, yeah.
That's what you had.
And while they're fighting there, at the same time, you got the shit going down then in Sicily later on, because then you have the Norman conquest of Sicily.
Yeah, another one of my
Who tried
favorites.
to invade the Byzantine Empire.
Another one of my favorites, by the way. You had God, who was it? It was Ethelred the Unready.
Yes!
Who's like, you know how I'm going to handle this situation? I've got all of these people who are Vikings on my good Christian England. Now, keep in mind, a lot of the Vikings were Christian at this point, too. But he was like, I can't have any of these Norsemen around. They're just so different from us. After all, our ancestors came from the same place 300 years apart.
But they're taking our women.
Literally, that was it. They were having this problem where English women preferred Viking men. So instead of just kind of being like, hey guys, why don't we try bathing more frequently and washing our hair? He's like, we should just kill all of them. Ethelred the Unready had 2 options. Those options were bathing and genocide. And he picked option 2, which is commitment. That is commitment to bad hygiene. And I gotta say, being as he was English, I'm deeply unsurprised. But anyway, he has all of the Danes, all of the Norse, all of them murdered. Even if you're only half Danish, you're killed.
Even though it was the ones that invited to his court. Like a bunch of in a delegation were invited to court. And then from there just slaughtered.
I believe it was if you were anything more than a quarter Danish or Norse, then you were murdered. When this happens, the sister of a man named Sven Forkbeard is killed. Sven is king of Denmark. Sven does not take kindly to this. He invades England and takes over basically the entire thing. There is
what was it called? It was something massacre. The St. Brice Day Massacre. That's what it was called. Yeah.
So the Vikings win this one. There's none of them left in England, but they bring a whole bunch more in. My favorite part is while this is going on, literally at the same time this is happening, Leif Erikson is screwing around in North America. So while you've got the most medieval thing possible happening here, you have Norse Christopher Columbus going over to Vinland, and also there's multiple sagas. Leif may not be the one who actually got here first. There might have been another guy named, was it Brother?
I don't even remember, I'll be honest.
It might have been Bjorn. I think it was a guy named Bjorn. He might be the first person to see North America. It probably would have happened around 980, 990. He goes back and he's like, yo, there's all this land over there. I didn't land there because, to be honest, it looked a little freaky, but if anybody wants to go check it out, they're welcome to. Leif Erikson is like, my father got kicked out of Iceland and Greenland sucks. So let me see what this guy was on about. And he's like, there are trees. I will call this tree land. He gets to another, I can't remember what he called the second one. And then he finally gets down to what was probably Newfoundland, and he's like, yes, there are grapes. I will call this Grapeland. Leif Erikson killing it at naming things, because he was accurate. His dad was not.
Well,
his dad was like,
behind Greenland when everything was as a scam to get people to try to colonize it because they needed a spot for resupply, and you can't have a logistical hub if there's no one there to resupply you to get fish.
What's shocking to me is actually that they didn't further colonize North America.
Journey being way too long.
But that's the thing is, had they actually dedicated some effort to it, it would have been very easy.
Well, also, you'd have to go over in significant numbers to be able to do anything. There's one of the key problems behind anything.
I think the biggest group to go over there was about 100 people.
Yeah, which is something that is decent, but
that's what Grenville had.
Yeah, but the problem is, after a set while, especially without the technology that you would have later for faster journeys across, literally anything happens, you do not have a way to speedily recover or do anything. So that's what's
so interesting about it. The trip from Norway to Vinland was shorter. They could do it faster than it would take the bigger ships used, the caravels and all that.
Yeah.
They could get from Norway to Vinland faster. It is a shorter
distance, you're right. It's like a way shorter distance.
Their boats were way faster. Viking longships were crazy fast. For the time, those things would be outpacing basically anything up until the 1700s.
Yeah, it makes sense based on even just the physics of the design.
To be fair, they also didn't then have the population to be able to just, the loss of 100 people out of Scandinavia is actually way more significant than the loss of 1,000 out of England or others.
I think in this situation, a big part of why they didn't colonize is that I don't think they realized how much was here. I think had the Vikings understood how big America actually is, they would have probably devoted a larger force to it.
I think they went there, they said, where are the monasteries?
Yeah.
Saw none.
Well, that's the thing is, think about, this is what drives me insane about the historical, people don't, it doesn't get thought about much within the medieval studies community. But if you look at the situation, they went to England, and what they found was a much larger population that had more money, more weapons, more land, basically was in every single way a superior force to what they had. They were like, nah, we're in, let's get them. Like, we can do this. And they, to a large extent, succeeded. They took over half of England.
Yep, that was the Danelaw, specifically from York, heading all the way up to Northumbria.
Yeah, it was Watling Street.
Well, I feel like they benefited a lot from the lack of feudalism at the time, right? Like in Scandinavia, like there are a lot more freeholding farmers,
yeah,
so they could be armed. Mm-hmm. Whereas there's so many like peasants, proto-serfs, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
In Britain and like France and everything, that there weren't as many armed people.
They were much more tribal. The Vikings were much more tribal.
Right.
Whereas the English were basically proto-feudal at that point.
And then basically, I think the Viking Age ends basically because you do get the feudal institutions, you get Christianity, you get all these things that kind of just...
Yeah. Little sidebar, it's hilarious the reason that many of the Vikings converted, because they were basically like, damn, dead god got hands. Like, your dude on the stick, he fights good. He beat Odin.
Yeah.
That was largely the way they thought of it. It was they were like, our gods are real, but your god is clearly superior, so I'm going to worship him too. And then 3 generations later, they were like, what gods?
Yeah, which it's such a cheat code that like it's so easy to convert like polytheists in a way, because you can just be like, just add one more.
Yeah.
Just add one more, and then eventually you're like, okay, now take away the others.
Yep.
It's the same thing would happen. It's like, it's kind of hilarious. So my wife is from Trinidad, and there's a large, of course, Indian population that is down there. And it's like...
when you say Indian...
But like, not native for here, but like West Indian, but like from India. Indian.
Okay.
And... so in this case, Hinduism is still quite large there, and there are many cases where she was a child walking into her grandparents' place, and it's like, here's the Hindu shrine with all the different gods, and there's just Jesus on the crucifix, just with it.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And that was a common thing. Yeah. It's a common thing, even in like India today. That is a thing that is there. You have some case of like even Shinto Buddhist, of like different Japanese Buddhist gods, and then there's Jesus too.
All right, we got Vishnu, we got Shiva, we got Krishna, and then above all of them, we have our Lord and Savior, Jesus.
Yeah. That's an interesting question, though. I feel like, why didn't the Abrahamic religions penetrate as much into India? Like, why was Hinduism like one of the
They
four?
partially did, but the answer that you could argue specifically is Hindu nationalism as a response to Islamic conquest.
Yeah.
Because Christianity was not the first one to go into India. The one that they had to deal with primarily was the Islamic conquest, and the amount of hatred between Muslim and Hindu, it kind of worked like a cycle. Basically, here's the way that it worked in India for centuries. Great Islamic conqueror comes in, takes over a huge swath of territory. He is a kind and just ruler that specifically wants to unite all peoples under him in a grand kumbaya. Mm-hmm. He dies. His son takes charge. What the fuck are all these pagans doing in my land? Burn their temples, kill all of them. I don't want any of this shit here. He dies. Man, my dad was crazy. Let's go all and hold hands and sing around the campfire again. Mm-hmm. We're all friendly. He dies. Guess what happens?
Yep.
Right.
And that is the cycle that India would basically fall into, of just continuous hostility, friendliness for centuries.
Hinduism is much different from European paganism.
It's way more codified.
Yeah,
in many cases.
It is a much more structured religious belief system, and with many of the European paganism, the various European pagan beliefs, what you have is, there's usually the gods we currently have actually beat the old gods. There were other gods, and these guys won. With Hinduism, there is this concept that all of these thousands of gods they have are different manifestations of the Brahma. So the Brahma is like this overwhelming will and force of the universe. I'm probably getting this somewhat wrong, but to put it into layman's terms, the Brahma exists around everything, through everything, is the creative will behind everything, and then all of these different gods are manifestations of his various characteristics. I hope I got that close enough that I'm not offending anybody.
From somebody currently in the middle of reading The Hero with a Thousand Faces, that's pretty accurate.
Okay,
to at least Joseph Campbell's understanding of it.
So that is much different from the European pagan beliefs, from any of the African pagan beliefs. But when you look at what Abrahamic religion is, it's a little closer. So one interesting thing that you see is a lot of the time, the more distance there is between Abrahamic belief and pagan belief, the easier it is to convert them. Because you've got to convince, because then all you're doing is convincing them, my God is stronger than your God. With Hinduism, that doesn't work. And also, Christians never really successfully launched any kind of military invasion of India until the secular age. So by the time the British are invading India and the Dutch are invading Sri Lanka, it's not a religious thing. They're not there going, hey, you're losing because my God is greater than your God. It's, hey, you're losing because I have a gun and you don't.
Honestly, in that case here with the India, it's not even the I have a gun and you don't. It was that the Indian princes, half the time, like in the overtaking of Bengal, didn't pay his fucking troops, and the British just bribed them. I kid you not. So the battle that determined the whole takeover of Bengal, the thing that started the East India Company to actually controlling what basically was a state company, was straight up the Sultan of Bengal didn't pay his troops, and the company just bribed him. So in the final battle, half his army just betrayed him, sided with the company, which then destroyed him.
It's great.
But he is right, yeah, it wasn't less a matter of religion and more so money, just straight up cash.
It was, the wars between the British and the Indians were more like modern wars than they were like the wars that were actually closer to them temporally. You know, the wars of the 1500s, that's what you would expect. Instead, you got something much more akin to the War on Terror. Like, you just had these highly technologically advanced armies coming in and taking over this large swath of territory and basically pitting all of the local rulers against each other.
I feel like the Brits were shit at converting people anyway.
That wasn't their goal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they tried, There
was a partial degree. There were elements and institutions specifically to convert people. Yeah. This is one of the reasons why there was actually quite a lot of Christian institutions that were built in India. This was a thing, and this was part of the goal. Was it to the same degree, and this is where I know we're going to get so many shitty comments that say specifically because of this, was it to the same degree as the Spanish and the Portuguese? No. God, no. But they also did it more than the Dutch did. Well, and that is because of Calvinism and the belief in predetermination of it doesn't fucking matter if we try to. A lot of it is the brand of Christianity. Catholics were a lot more hands-on. Anglicans were sort of in the middle, and then Calvinists just didn't care.
My understanding of the Brits in England that they did try and convert Native Americans, but they simply failed, basically. Like, the Spanish show up, basically out of nowhere, and they come in to conquer, and everyone's like, all right, well, you guys conquered us, so you better do it. Whereas the British are like, we're not like those evil Spanish. We're just gonna buy your land and slowly push you out. And then that never inspires. Well, there were they called praying Indians or Christian Indians in the early New England colonies, but after King Philip's War and some of these major wars, they just go, actually, let's.
Well, so what's really interesting about it is the Catholics were very successful. The Anglicans were not. The Church of England totally failed to convert Native Americans. The Methodists, on the other hand, were extremely successful because they would go in and they would be like, no. It's not that our beliefs are right and yours are wrong. We believe many of the same things, just we conceive of who God is differently. And so what they would do is they would do the same kind of syncretism and Christianization the Catholics did in Europe, but they would do it in a much more gentle way. And so you would have Methodist missionaries going out deep into what at the time would have been called Indian territory, and they would come back and basically, the question would be, well, how'd you do that? And they were like, I treated them like people.
It's a big important distinction, Amazing, groundbreaking, really.
We were recently talking about this with, we did a video on the death of Jordan Grider and the Wendigo and all that. And one thing, in 1907, there were two men from a very, very far northern, I think they were Cree, settlement up near Hudson Bay. And they were arrested because they were Wendigo killers. And the Canadians, it was really the RCMP, or I guess at that time the Royal Northwestern, or the Northwestern Mounted Police. They were really just trying to pull a power play. But what happens is they go up there and they arrest these two men who, basically what they were actually doing was people would come to them as relatives were delirious from starvation or sickness or something like that, and on the verge of death, and they were like, hey, if something isn't done, my uncle is going to turn into a Wendigo. And for those who don't know, a Wendigo is a, specifically Algonquian, Anishinaabe, that kind of group, northeastern Native American monster that is, it's complicated, but the basic version of it is you get desperate, you commit an act of cannibalism, and you become a monster. You are incurable. There is nothing that can be done. The only answer to a Wendigo is to kill it. And they are very dangerous. They are extremely selfish. They are motivated solely by greed and gluttony. These two guys were called in by families whenever a family member seemed like they were going to turn into a Wendigo, and basically they would euthanize this person. Now, granted, it wasn't always pretty. Sometimes it involved a lot of strangling. But it wasn't like they were just showing up and killing people randomly. The Northwestern Mounted Police.
It was a familial request.
Well, what's ironic about this is, of course, the Canadian Mounted Police go and arrest them for murder, and now the Canadian healthcare system just does that.
It does.
They're like, oh, you're a little sad? Well, Zoloft is expensive, so why don't we just kill you? Just wild. But yeah, this guy, Jack, God, why is it escaping me what his last name was? It started with an F. Can't remember off the top of my head.
Neither can I.
Yeah, this guy, Jack Fiddler. Yeah, Jack Fiddler, he's arrested. His brother is arrested. They go to trial. Well, Jack actually kills himself. But his brother Joseph goes to trial. And at this trial, despite the jury finds him guilty because they're like, well, technically under Canadian law, yeah, it was murder. But judge, they didn't even know they were under Canadian law. Like, they had no idea they were part of Canada. They were operating on their own tribal laws and customs. Right. And so you have the natives from the community who are like, please, you don't understand. They didn't know any better. These are our ways. This is what we've done for, as long as we can remember. Yep. And, that wasn't enough. But then you had Methodist missionaries who had gone out to talk to these people. And the Methodist missionaries were like, please, you don't understand. I'm telling you as a good Christian man, this is not murder. This is not what you think it is. It's just a misunderstanding. Please be merciful. And that wasn't enough. So a bunch of Canadian fur trappers, literal white Canadian fur trappers, are like, Judge, you must understand. These people are our friends. They just didn't know. They didn't do this out of malice. They weren't trying to harm anybody. They were just doing what they believed to be right within their culture. And the judge is like, well, no amount of pagan ideas can confront the law. And he sentences a 94-year-old man to death. Joseph Fiddler goes on to go to a prison in Manitoba, where 2 years later they successfully file an appeal on his behalf. But before he can be released, he dies of tuberculosis.
Oh. I mean, to be fair, at the beginning of the 20th century, that is a very realistic ending to have among anything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, dying because of the Canadian Mounted Police is a thing that just continues to this day. They're very good at that. They're very good at letting people die.
To a shockingly high degree.
Oh, it's incredible.
All we need now at this point is to somehow turn it to the Crusades, and my prediction from the very beginning was right. Because did I not predict that we were going to get into
modern politics
and then Crusades? And I said it.
How are you bringing this to the Crusades?
I didn't call any of this shit, but we did it.
How are you getting us to the Crusades?
Yeah.
Fuck, I don't know at this point here. I'm zoned out. I'm not even sure what I should do.
Normans and
yeah, we're talking about
we did talk about the Normans. We did do that whole thing, and then we went into Constantinople, which theoretically at that point you could talk about what specifically happened, because we're talking about Vikings and colonization and what happened after Harold Hardrada lost.
If I'm not mistaken, William the Conqueror's invasion of Britain was technically a crusade.
What year was that?
He had to get permission from the Pope.
Yes, but that was not permission for a religious war. That was a permission for a claim. Everyone was Christian at that time. It was because his claim was legitimized by the Pope, because you could ask the Pope for legitimacy over your heraldic claim over someone else.
Yeah.
And in his case, the Pope liked him more.
Yeah. Well, I think it was specifically the fact that he had gotten Godwinson to swear on the bones of a saint.
Exactly. So per the story of what specifically he did, and the Pope believed it, and so that's why he gave
It's crazy how the Pope just kept siding with the French.
What? You mean at a time where specifically the French were gaining massive power and influence over the papacy with what?
Yes, the Pape.
The amount of times that we could then talk about the investiture controversy and then immediately the whole thing with the Avignon papacy.
Mm-hmm. I love the investor controversy. It's my favorite thing to bring up.
Tell me about it.
Okay, well, this is going to somehow get us into the Crusades. I'll tell you that much. You've just fulfilled this prophecy.
Because
we just now we're in the 1070s, so we're inching closer. We're inching closer to 1095 here. So the investor controversy started in, I want to say, the late 1060s.
So I thought it was the 1090s.
Hold on. It came to a head in the 1070s. I think it was 1075. But basically, there was an argument going on. By this point in European history, bishops...
No, it starts in the late 1070s. It goes all the way until the early 1100s.
Really?
Yes.
When did Henry IV lay siege to...
So the thing is, you have to remember, that wasn't just over one emperor. That wasn't the case. Like it was over multiple different ones. So it's a period of about 50 years.
I'm probably thinking about the stuff that was going on in the 1070s then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the 1070s, I think it's Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire, which we are not going back there. Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire, if I'm not mistaken, gets into an argument with the Pope. Now, at this point in European history, specifically Western European history, bishops are not just the head of the biggest church in the area. They're not just the person sitting in the cathedral. They are working as lords, as military commanders. 200 years after this, we get Bishop Arnaud, who's the one at the siege of Brazier. Who's the one who says, kill them all, God will know those that are his.
Oh, what? You mean the thing that was part of the Cathar Crusade?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, what are we talking about now then? Oh, that was a crusade! Yes, here's the thing. Everyone thinks crusades are purely in the Middle East. No, crusade was basically just a Christian holy war. So there were multiple crusades specifically within Europe. Yeah. The Reconquista was a crusade. It was referred to as, at the time, a crusade. Yep. The war against the Cathars of southern France was a crusade.
The war against the Lithuanians.
So Teutonic Wars against the Lithuanians was a crusade. The Baltic Crusade.
Yep. So at this point, you've got bishops leading armies. And you've got bishops running entire economic districts. You've got bishops present at council meetings. And the secular lords of Europe, specifically in this case Henry IV of the Holy Roman Empire, he's like, hey, it's not really cool that the Pope gets to just decide who this bishop is. Because that person needs to run part of my kingdom.
Well, also one of the things that would end up happening is that specifically that a bishop would die, and then you'd have to wait for an entire process, sending multiple letters and delegations down to Rome, getting an official to come up. And if you're located somewhere in Germany and you have to cross the Alps in order to get there in the first place, that is a process that could take not just months, but potentially years to get resolved. In the meantime, your district has no bishop.
So nobody's ruling it. So if it were a secular district where it was just ruled by the king and one of his lords, somebody died, the king went, all right, you're his closest cousin, you're in charge now. And that was just kind of how it worked. With the bishops, that was not how it worked, and they needed to figure out a different system. Henry IV goes and he says, hey, I need to be able to fill this seat, and you're not doing it quickly enough. And the Pope goes, well, it's a bishop, so it's my job. This turns into a very big argument that actually at one point ends up with a Holy Roman Imperial Army outside of, I don't think it was Rome. He retreated to a different fortress, if I remember correctly.
Wasn't Ravenna?
I think it was somewhere in between. Anyway, the Pope, it would have been Pope Gregory VII. He retreats to a castle elsewhere in Italy, and they surround him, and eventually they are able to bring a resolution to this before it turns into war, into a battle. Henry IV goes back north. And then it ends up actually being Henry II of England who comes up with the compromise and mediates between them, which was that one of them got to nominate, the other got to confirm. But for like a while here, you've just got the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope arguing with each other over whose job it is to choose bishops.
Yes. Which in turn...
A compromise did not occur to them.
which for a time helped to contribute to basically an ongoing, not civil war, because that's not the right term here, but within Italy itself, you basically had, since this was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and you had the varying different city-states under duchies, cities, whether it was councils, republics, etc., that were subservient to one side or the other, which created it was the Guelphs and the Ghibellines? Yes. So you had two sides, one supported the Holy Roman Emperor, one supported the Pope, and then depending upon, basically, you could have two things. Like, let's say that Bologna, which I can't remember what the actual side supported, but let's say that Bologna was pro-Pope. Well, the rivals, Milan, would go, whoa, you support the Pope? Well, fuck you, I don't like you, so I'm going to support the Emperor. And this turned into a proxy war where all these different Italian city-states were at each other's throat, killing each other for 50 years, over who supported who, just because of their own rivalries.
The Germans are really good at getting Italians killed historically.
So you know what? That actually brings me to another topic that we were considering about speaking on this evening, in relation to leaders of Germany.
Where is this going? Where is this going? Are you going to start talking about the trains? Because the trains don't make up for the rest of it.
No, and getting each other killed, and in particular, the type of regimes that they had. And the figures at the top of the regimes.
Where is this going?
Are also known as dictators.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And where did we want to go with dictator?
Oh no, one of the ideas. Okay, so on this note, from the previous thing, I posted a thing on Instagram, and I think, did we all post a thing in here as well for asking for suggestions?
Oh, so when did we start?
We started we started recording a little over an hour ago. It is about 10 minutes less than the recording, so we started about 50 minutes ago.
Gotcha.
All right, so I'm going to pull this up here. I posted a thing to Instagram, and for a lot of future episodes, this is something that specifically we're planning on doing, taking the questions and suggestions and things that you all put, and then going and actually asking and talking about that here. So let's see. Someone had put, oh god, the first one I see in here. We just talked about Italian city-state wars. The first thing that pops up on here is War of the Bucket.
The War of the Bucket, what a classic.
War of the Bucket, which mind you...
The War of the Bucket is exactly what it sounds like. Somebody stole somebody's bucket.
Except that's not true. The bucket didn't happen until afterwards, was taken as a war prize and a joke, basically. The war was never actually done over the bucket, despite what anyone actually says.
Wait, really quickly. I'd love to get a little bit more in-depth on the War of the Bucket, because that sounds hilarious, and then we will go to the question we're leading up to for the Patreon section.
Okay, got it. For for anyone who's going to actually do that, from Miss Raymarie, who wrote Worst Dictator Ever. On here, like who were the worst dictators ever?
So we're gonna learn about the War of the Bucket, and then once we conclude that story,
it'll be time for the Patreon only segment, which will be who is the worst dictator ever.
Exactly.
Also, really quickly, when we say worst because I have to run to the bathroom really quick. When we say worst dictator ever, do we mean the most evil dictator ever, or do we mean the dictator who was just really bad at his job?
You know what? I want to hear both answers from everybody.
Sounds good. Because Mussolini is really on neither list, but he was very good at trains.
According to a good friend of ours, surprisingly positive results from questionnaires in relation to Mussolini in modern Italy.
One of my friends did a semester abroad in Italy, and I remember texting him early in, and I was like, hey, how's the semester abroad going? And he was like, the only things I've heard about Mussolini here have been vaguely sympathetic. I was like, okay. Cool. Maybe Italy is different than I expected it to be. Because they were not fans of the guy in 1945.
Not really.
No, not after everything.
Yeah, I'm going to run to the bathroom really quick, though. You guys continue.
Okay.
You tell them about the bucket.
Okay, can tell about the war. So, common myth.
You're going to hear me pee.
Hang on, we need to pause because we will actually hear you pee.
Just take the microphone off. You just take the microphone off.
You guys are so smart.
That's what I did when I went to take a shit here earlier.
Leave it on, just turn it off.
What? I want you to think about the words you just said to me.
Yeah, leave it on,
just turn it off.
Yeah, English, do you understand?
I do you? How does something be both on and off?
Because you leave it on your body, but you turn off the machine.
I'm gonna kiss you.
Don't threaten me with a good time. Tell me about the bucket.
All right, common myth. This is one of the most common side of things here on the internet when people talk about dumb wars, dumb events. Because for anyone who's curious, who's never actually seen me before on here, I got famous off of TikTok first for doing dumb events in history. That was the big thing. And one of the popular big ones is talking about the War of the Bucket, which, according to the stories, this actually takes place. It's pretty sure it's during the time period of the whole Ghibellines versus the Guelphs. Like, it's that same time period, and it's Modena, which is one of the city-states, and Bologna. And this, as the story goes, the Modenese went and stole a bucket from a well in Bologna, which in turn triggered a war that got a bunch of people killed. And they did it because the cities were rivals, and Bologna was famous for its artisanal wells that it had. So it was like a grievous insult. That's not true. That's not how that went down. Yes, a bucket was stolen, something was taken, but that happened after the war. The whole context of where this all goes down is that, as we already talked about with the Ghibellines and the Guelphs, is that these states already hated each other, and then in a process of war, Modena was actually outnumbered by the Bolognese, and what they did is, through a series of very quick surprise attacks, took a series of fortresses that were along the way that would protect Bologna, which I can't even tell you the exact process of how this all went down. I think if I recall correctly, there is a, why am I drawing a blank in here for like the quick history videos that is done by the guy on YouTube? It's all animated with the little stick figure shapes. Why am I drawing a blank on this? Ooh. Why am I drawing a blank? Oversimplified. Yeah, he has a great one that actually on there that shows the process of how they did this. But they go and they win, Modena wins while outnumbered, and then proceeds to have a massive fucking party outside the gates of Bologna because they're just showing off like, ha 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 ha, we won, fuck all of you. And then in their process of having this party, they stole a bucket and went home. And that is why in Modena, there is, in a museum, a bucket. So it's a common myth that people then have is that they went to and actually stole this bucket on purpose. No, that was just a war trophy that was taken afterwards as a giant FU to the city.
Amazing. I love it.
So that is the context of that. God, wait, where the hell do I even go in from here? Because at this point we're talking about this and Aiden's off pissing himself.
We could probably cut it and go to the Patreon right here.
Yeah, at this point probably.
But we could do that, or we could touch a little bit more on the Crusades in terms of, is there...
I do like how from the very fucking beginning, did I not call where this was going?
You did.
Do you know why? I figured? Because this guy who sits here is a person that I know, no matter what is going on, is inevitably going to touch upon something with modern politics and then religion. And I figured from religion, considering we were talking about Vikings and Constantinople, inevitably the Crusades was going to come up. So I called that based on a prediction of his behavior.
Me?
Yes, on you.
I gotta turn that on. It's toasty in here.
So
It should be on. Why is it not?
that's why I did that here. And now, of course, this has all happened when the whole thing about this was supposed to specifically talk about the Vikings and colonization. We only talked about what they did in England. We didn't even mention what was going on in Dublin or in Kievan Rus and how any of that came into existence, when this whole point was to talk about Viking colonization.
What were they doing in Dublin and Kievan?
Fucking.
Oh?
What did Kevin have to do with this?
So specifically, you have Dublin was, if I remember the pronunciation, Dublin was how it was supposed to. Dublin.
Yeah, for the most essentially.
Essentially, Dublin is not an Irish city. It's a Viking city. It was specifically founded by the Vikings who established a raiding base there in order to be able to raid the surrounding territory.
The village there there was a village there when the Vikings got there, which actually might have been established by Brythonic Celts, not Hibernic Celts.
But it's like a fishing village, and the whole thing was taken over, fortified, and turned into an actual city instead of a little village.
It had a nice little natural cove.
And then from there, they used that as a staging ground to raid all across Ireland and then Wales.
Yeah. The Isle of Man.
So
didn't occur to them to just stay on the Isle of Man.
So that's where Dublin comes into existence, and they're holding with the Irish, and a lot of people then wonder afterwards, it's like, okay, well, what happened to them?
Well, now we're going to have to do an episode on Brian Boru.
Oh, yeah.
Which we already have an episode on Brian Boru that's me doing it as a documentary, but that would just be a good discussion.
Yeah.
The most common prevailing theory is that they bred themselves into the island, basically. That eventually, as the generations wore on, the Vikings didn't stay, separate. they intermingled.
They did.
Which, after a time, meant that the population gradually diffused so that there was no distinction between who was native Irish and who was one of the foreigners that had conquered the territory decades prior.
Yeah, it's
To some extent, but I feel like Brian Brew kicked him out. I feel like the
Brian Boru didn't kick him out. He ended up working with him.
We kicked a bunch out though.
He kicked a bunch out, yeah.
Yeah. The old chronicles will say he kicked him out, and the modern historians want to say like,
Yeah.
no, it's not this big a deal. But
He was an interesting fella. Well, we'll say that. We'll save it for another episode because I'm gonna need to go through and read and rewatch my video because Brian Boru is one of those topics that like his story is so convoluted and it goes to so many different places that it would be difficult to get through in an hour in this format, let alone the next 5 minutes. But the story of his death is also fascinating because he's executed by a Viking warrior who at the point of Brian Boru's death, he is so old that he can't take part in the battle. He's just back at camp praying. And according to the legends, a Viking warrior basically ran past the battle lines, did something very dishonorable, and came up and killed Brian Boru. But the guy who killed him, the Irish were so incensed at this, they didn't just kill him. They cut his stomach open and had him carry his own intestines as he wrapped them around a tree.
Goddamn.
Like, you hear about the Norse and the blood eagle and things like that, and you're like, damn, that's metal as hell. And then the Irish were like, oh no, we'll get right in the mud with you. We are also disgusting. We will also do horrifying things for no real reason except horror.
We're gonna need to do an episode on like historical like punishments and torture and things that happen.
And how
to people.
almost none of the things people think were actual medieval torture instruments are real.
All I know is I've never been more proud to be Irish.
Oh yeah, baller. Baller move. Yeah, Brian Boru ended up dethroning the previous High King of Ireland, who wasn't really
By that
High
point,
King.
it was heavily decentralized already. He
was
had basically
yeah.
no authority whatsoever.
Yeah, it was the same thing that you saw in Wales, where they basically be like, hey, this guy's High King, which just means when the rest of us disagree on something, he gets to be the deal breaker.
And even then, Brian Boru, he's the one that re-centralized things for a while. Like, he actually established a proper authority in government.
He was the Catholic Church in Ireland referred to him as Emperor of the Irish and Scots. By the way, this is contemporaneous with Ethelred the Unready and what he did, as well as Leif Erikson finding North America. The Vikings were doing
happening at the same
so
time.
many things.
And in the meantime, this is the thing I was pointing out here not like 5 minutes ago. This is only talking about basically what the Danes and the Norwegians were doing. At the same time, the Swedes were colonizing Russia.
Mm-hmm. I love the Swedish reasoning for it. They're like, oh yeah, we were just going down there. They request our help. They say they have no king. And in reality, it's like, no, it was a bunch of Swedish Vikings who were like, this is ours now.
Basically what happened, and that's how the Kievan Rus came into existence, is all those varying different little princedoms, like whether you have Muscovy, whether you have Kazan, whether you have Yaroslav, I think.
Yeah, Yaroslav was Kiev.
And then Novgorod, all these different ones. Well, Novgorod eventually, became the Merchant Republic and everything. But all these varying different princedoms, I think there was, 13 of them?
Something like that.
13, 14, 15, something like that. Different princedoms that were established, and almost all of them were just a Nordic nobility ruling over a Slavic minority. Or majority.
Which drives me nuts about the show Vikings, because it takes place in the 9th century for the most part. And they've got all of these, Rus nobles speaking with Russian accents. And I'm like, everyone else in the show has the proper accent. Why are just these guys wrong?
I wish I could answer that here, but unfortunately
granted,
we're talking about Netflix and everything else.
To be fair, this is the same season of the show where a Rus army invades Norway, which just didn't happen. Ever. At any point. They also win one of the battles. Have you seen the Vikings all the way through?
No, I didn't. I refused to watch it. The
first 3 seasons of Vikings are great. After that, it gets a little silly. Mm-hmm. Like you gotta pretend that you're not a historian, and that you're just a normal person who doesn't know what this is.
I have a tendency to hyperfixate on armor, weapons, battle, like all different kinds of things.
Believe it or not, they did a pretty decent job with that side of things.
Even the ones where they're showing people going into battle continuously without wearing helmets?
Aside from the helmets issue.
Because that was honestly the immediate thing. It's going to sound petty. I know there's going to be so many comments that give me so much shit for this. But the moment that I see battles taking place where people are rushing in with just like the full features of the actors and everything wearing no helmets.
Yeah.
Per Nordic history, if you had anything, you would have completely unarmored people who have nothing more than a spear and a shield and a tunic.
And an axe.
Yes, but if they had one piece of armor, they had a fucking helmet.
Yeah. That was like the first thing you protected. So I do get why they do it for film reasons. Like, I'm sure you are kind of thinking about it too.
100%. It's because you need to be able to identify which character is who in the middle of the battle, so that way you know, in terms of who's getting injured, where your emotional stakes lie.
What's frustrating about it is that there is an argument to be made that certain members of the armies at this time would have had identifiable helmets.
Especially if you have a person that it's not a low-class soldier. It's like, oh yes, here's a person who actually would be an upper nobility person who would have actually a full-out armored kit. But no, we're going to show them in their stylized robe fighting in the battle. Fucking hell.
Well, I'm also surprised that they wouldn't take the opportunity to then make it that much easier to have these stuntmen be so much less identifiable compared to the main actors.
You'd think.
So then you could actually increase the level of intensity of
fair,
whatever choreographed fighting you have going on.
To be fair, by like season 4 or 5 of the show, half the army is female.
Oh
Just
my god,
no.
I remember that shit.
Because first of all, like on the one hand, physiology. Like, there was no reason to have an army that was half female. Especially when most of the armies you were fighting against were entirely male. It just didn't make sense.
No.
But then on top of that, a man is very easily replaced when it comes to furthering the generations. Women, not so much. Women can only have one child at a time. Men can have multiple.
So wait, are you saying that a large reason that they did not want women to be warriors was because they valued them higher than men?
Yeah, literally. Oh no, that was, and especially in the Nordic and the Celtic cultures, women were seen as extremely important. They were protected. It wasn't an issue of capability. They were well aware that women could be battle commanders, that women could even be successful in physical combat. They just looked at it as why? Why would you do that?
Yeah, why take the risk?
Yeah, because, and this is a time when, especially in the pagan cultures, polygamy was not an issue. So if you lost a man in combat, then that woman could just marry another man. If you lost a woman, it was a much more important loss.
Yes. Immediately.
Every good Celt knows that the place for women in battle isn't in the front lines. It's behind everybody with the wagons, so that anybody who retreats can get stabbed by them.
Exactly. which also, by the way, is most likely where shield maidens came from.
They also did have the story, remember, of even from Roman times, they had stories of Germanic tribesmen with the women that were behind the front line of men, screaming at them, urging them on to fight.
Yeah, and there is a good likelihood that the average Germanic woman, including the Norse, was trained at the very least at the militia level, where they could defend their own home, because with these raiding cultures, very often the men would be away for months at a time, and so the women would need to know how to defend themselves.
Yes. Immediately. It's also one of the key reasons as to why in other warrior cultures for defense, the Japanese, women were oftentimes trained, at least on the noble level, from samurai family. They were specifically trained to fight. There was a term, onabushi. Woman warrior, female warrior, that's the whole point. And typically daughters of nobles were trained to fight so that they would be able to defend themselves if someone came and attacked their castle while the men were away at war.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, specifically gentlemen, train your wives and daughters with a gun.
Train them to use a gun. Don't train them with
Don't train them
Well, yes.
with a gun.
Well, yeah, but train them to use it. Okay, all right, all
Things that need to
right.
be specified here.
Clip that, though. Clip that.
Yeah.
You're gonna get better at shooting those baskets. I swear.
Faster, faster, faster. I said dance.
You're gonna learn to waltz and you're gonna lack it.
Oh, God.
Remember, if you don't do the step, the foot gets hit. This is possibly, at this point, we probably should have already cut it here before
We should have gone
so
to
that this goes
Patreon.
on to Patreon.
We should go to-
But yeah, if you want to catch the discussion about who the worst dictator in history was,
Among other things, let's do a retroactive Patreon transition so we can add some of what we just said into the
I think all of that can stay.
You think?
I think all of that can stay.
All right, when we get canceled, I'll,
It was obvious. That was pretty clearly in jest.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're fine.
Nobody here is advocating violence against women. In fact, I think we just very, very aggressively advocated not violence against women.
Yes.
At the same time, this has been said, I just got a message saying specifically from my wife that the women have decided that they're going to steal the company credit card and take a flight to Austria. So
Maybe we deserve that one.
maybe we deserve that one in the
Of
end.
all places, why Austria? Especially given what we've been just talking about.
Well, since we're about to start talking about the worst dictators in history, Austria seems like it might be relevant.
It is a very relevant place in terms of this conversation.
So, if you are interested in hearing us discuss who we believe the least successful dictators and the most evil dictators in history were, go check it out on Patreon. But aside from that, anybody have any final closing thoughts?
I would say, other than I can't wait to talk about the dangers of not pampering artists. I think we should give everybody's personal information and tags, all that fun stuff out.
All right, so Aiden lives at...
I was about to say, my phone number is.
I have trained my woman with firearms, so don't come a knocking unless you want to meet your whatever creator that you assign as your personal deity. Anyway,
I'm a Scorpio. I figured while we were giving personal information out.
yeah.
I'm Roman Helmet Guy on all platforms.
Careful with that hand there, bud. We're talking about dictators from Austria here.
Okay, Mussolini, calm down with the Roman shit.
True.
You too! You gotta censor their hands. Put it like black redaction bars over their hands.
At that point,
Here's the thing. It's going to be a black redaction fan.
Yeah.
So it'll start down here as a bar and then raise into a fan. You saw nothing. You saw nothing.
Oh my goodness.
You're gonna get us canceled.
Yeah, no, I can't. Yeah. Sorry, guys.
Oh boy.
Let's try this again. All right, everybody, if you've enjoyed this far, if you would like to see us talk about who the worst and least successful dictators of all time have been, come join us on Patreon if you can. Until then, for now,
I am Stakui.
I'm Aiden.
Roman Helmet Guy.
I am also Aiden.
I'm Aiden. He's Aiden. We're all Aiden. All right, see you on Patreon, guys.